Hello, and welcome to the Unsleeping Historian. Find a comfortable position. Allow the weight of your body to settle, and the sounds of your world to fade into the background. There is nothing for you to do now, but to breathe and to listen. Tonight, we journey to a time and a place that lives vividly in our imagination, yet remains shrouded in myth. We travel to the land of Japan during the long, deliberate peace of the Edo period. When you hear the word samurai, what comes to mind? Perhaps it is the image of a lone warrior, silhouetted against a blood-red sun, his hand resting on the hilt of a perfectly forged katana. Perhaps you picture epic battles, castles under siege, and duels decided in the space of a single, flashing heartbeat. This is the samurai of legend, the warrior that cinema and story have given us. And while that warrior certainly existed, his time was fleeting. For over 2.5 centuries, from the early 1600s to the late 1800s, Japan was united under the Toku. It was an era defined not by war, but by a profound, enforced, and often stifling peace. So what becomes of a warrior when there are no wars to fight? What happens to a sword that is never drawn in anger? This is the story we will explore tonight. The unseen life. We will step away from the battlefield and into the quiet street, the formal tatami rooms, and the complex inner world of the samurai. We will walk through the daily life of a warrior struggling to find purpose in a world that no longer needed his primary skill. We will recount a legendary tale of revenge and honor that would define his class for centuries. We will delve into the philosophical code that guided his actions and questioned its very origins. And finally, we will contrast his rigid world with the vibrant, fleeting pleasures of a new society rising alongside him. So, relax. Let your mind drift. Our journey does not begin with the clash of steel, but with the soft rustle of silk, the quiet scratch of a brush on paper, and the heavy silence of a warrior's boredom. Let us begin. Imagine yourself waking, not to the sound of a war horn, but to the gentle, diffused light of dawn filtering through a paper shoshi screen. The air is cool, and carries the faint, clean scent of tatami mats, and the damp earth of a small, meticulously kept garden. Outside, you can hear the rhythmic of a neighbor practicing his swordsmanship with a wooden bakona sound that is both a comfort and a quiet accusation. You are a samurai. Let us call you Tanaka. You belong to the ruling class, the pinnacle of the social hierarchy. Your family has a proud name, and your ancestors fought in the great wars of unification a century ago. Their armor rests in a dusty corner of your small home, a silent testament to a more glorious past. But your reality is different. The rhythm of your life is not dictated by campaigns and battles, but by the slow, grinding machinery of bureaucracy. You rise, and the rituals begin. Every movement is prescribed, every interaction governed by a complex and unyielding code of etiquette. The way you fold your bedding, the way you wash your face, the way you dress. You carefully tie the cords of your formal hakama trousers and slide your 2 swords, the long katana and the shorter wakizashi, into your sash. This pairing, the daishu, is the soul of the samurai. It is your right and your symbol. You spend more time polishing them than you do wielding them. They are a profound statement of your status and a profound financial burden. After a simple breakfast, a bowl of rice, some pickled vegetables, perhaps a thin miso soup, you walk to your post. You are not marching to a fortress, but to a provincial magistrate's office. You are, for all intents and purposes, a clerk, a functionary. Your battlefield is a room filled with scrolls, inkstones, and endless stacks of paper. Your day is spent not in strategic war councils, but in reviewing tax records from farming villagers. You check figures, stamp documents with your personal seal, and register land ownership. The greatest conflict you might face is a discrepancy in a merchant's shipping manifest. The work is dull, it is repetitive, and it is a constant, quiet humiliation for a man trained since boyhood to find glory in death, not accuracy in accounting. Imagine the immense social pressure. You are a samurai. You must, at all times, appear dignified, stoic, and above the worries of common men. But your stipend, paid in fixed amounts of rice called koku. In this long era of peace, the economy has shifted. It is no longer based solely on rice, but on currency, on trade, on commerce, the world of the merchants. And while the official social order places you, the warrior, far above the merchant, the practical reality is the opposite. The price of rice fluctuates, but your stipend does not. The cost of maintaining your station, the proper silk clothing, the upkeep of your home, the expensive ceremonies and social obligations steadily rises. So you find yourself in a state of constant, hidden struggle. The silk of your kimono might be exquisitely patterned. The roof of your home might be elegantly tiled, but you know that several tiles are cracked, and you cannot afford the repairman. The greatest shame is your relationship with the merchant class. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Edo. You pass the shops, filled with vibrant fabrics, gleaming lacquerware, and exotic spices. These are the domains of the chunin. They do not follow a code of honor. They follow the flow of money. They are officially the lowest class in the hierarchy. And yet, you find yourself, on a quiet afternoon, slipping through the back entrance of a rice broker's shop. You bow your head to a samurai, to a man in simple cotton robes. You speak in low, hushed tones, arranging a loan, using next year's rice stipend as collateral. The merchant is polite, of course. He is deferential. But you both understand the truth. In this room, he holds all the power. The shame of this moment is a cold stone in your stomach. Many of your peers are in the same position, trapped in a cycle of debt to the very class they are supposed to rule. The hierarchy that places you at the top also serves as your cage. Your rank is hereditary. You were born into this specific station, and you will almost certainly die in it. There is no glorious battle to prove your valor and earn a promotion. There is no great lord to impress with your skill, leading to a greater fiefdom. Your path is set. Your son will inherit your meager stipend, your bureaucratic job, and your honorable, crushing debts. This lack of purpose, this gnawing boredom, leads many samurai down darker paths. Some spend their days in idle pursuits, endlessly practicing forms and drills for a battle that will never come. Others fall into gambling, or spend their borrowed money in the pleasure districts, seeking a fleeting escape from the rigid expectations of their lives. A constant, low-level frustration simmers just beneath the serene, stoic surface. The government issues edicts, reminding the samurai of their moral duty, scolding them for their lack of frugality. But these are mere words against the powerful tide of economic and social change. Your day as a bureaucrat ends. You walk home as the sun sets, casting long shadows across the narrow streets. You pass a dojo where younger boys are shouting as they train, their wooden swords clashing. It is a sound from another world, another time. You return to your quiet home. Your wife, from another modest samurai family, greets you with a silent bow. The evening meal is as frugal as the morning's. Afterwards, perhaps you sit and practice calligraphy, the careful, deliberate strokes of the brush, a form of meditation. Or perhaps you simply sit, polishing your swords, the gleam of the steel a reflection of a life you were meant to live. Here, in the quiet dimness of your home, the weight of your name is both your only comfort and your heaviest burden. You are a warrior with no war, a symbol of power with no real power to wield. You are a member of a class slowly, imperceptibly, becoming obsolete, trapped in the gilded cage of a peace you are sworn to uphold, the enduring echo. The tale of the 47 Ronin for the samurai we imagined. Tanaka, living his quiet life of bureaucratic repetition. Stories would have been a vital nourishment for the soul, and no story was more potent, more defining of his class's ideals, than the one that unfolded at the turn of the 18th century. It is a story that, even today, echoes through Japanese culture as the ultimate expression of loyalty and honor. It is the true story of the 47 Ronin. Our narrative begins not with a Ronin, a masterless samurai, but with a proud and powerful lord. In the year 1701, in the sprawling, magnificent Edo castle of the Shogun, a young daimyo named Asano Naganori was given a task of great importance. He was to host an envoy from the emperor in Kyoto. This was not a matter of warfare, but of intricate, almost sacred protocol. Every bow, every word, every placement of a tea-ball was fraught with meaning. To guide him through this complex world of ceremony, the court appointed a tutor, a man named Kira. Kira was a high-ranking official, a master of court etiquette, and a man who had grown accustomed to the privileges of his position. It was common practice for lords like Asano to offer their tutors expensive gifts in exchange for their wisdom. But Asano was a man of stern principle. Perhaps he believed the shogun's business should be conducted without the taint of bribery. Perhaps he was simply naive to the unwritten rules of the court. He offered no such gifts. Kira, feeling slighted and insulted by this country lord's lack of deference, began a campaign of subtle but relentless humiliation. He ridiculed his supposed ignorance in front of other officials. He treated him not as a fellow nobleman, but as a bumbling fool. For weeks, Asano endured this. He was a man bound by his duty, a guest in the shogun's palace, and he bore the insults with a stoic silence that concealed a growing storm within. The breaking point came in a corridor of the castle, after a particularly sharp and public insult. Something within Asano snapped. The centuries of warrior instinct, suppressed by decades of peace, surged to the surface. He drew his short sword and lunged at Kira. He managed to wound the official on his face and shoulder before they were separated. The act was catastrophic. To draw a weapon within the sacred confines of the shogun's castle was the highest of crimes. There could be no trial, no mitigating circumstances. Judgment was swift and absolute. That very day, Asano Naganori was ordered to commit seppuku ritual suicide. His vast domain was to be confiscated, his family line dissolved, and his hundreds of samurai retainers were to be disbanded. Their swords and status forfeit. They were to become ronin, masterless men, adrift in the world. That afternoon, in the garden of a fellow lord's mansion, Asano calmly composed a death poem. He knelt on the white cloth, and with the utmost dignity, fulfilled his sentence. His life was over, but the consequences of his final, desperate act were just beginning to unfold. News reached his castle in the Ukiyo-e domain, and his retainers were thrown into chaos. Their world had been shattered. Their master was dead, their homes were lost, and their purpose was gone. At the head of these retainers was a man named Jishi Koranasuke, Asano's chamberlain and most trusted advisor. He was a calm, thoughtful, and pragmatic man. Officially, the samurai were to disperse, to find new masters if they could, or to fade into obscurity. But for a core group of them, led by Jishi, their master had been provoked, humiliated, and driven to an act of desperation, while the man who had caused it, Kira, remained not only alive, but unpunished. In their view, this was an imbalance in the cosmos. Justice had not been served. They held a secret meeting, and there, with solemn oaths, about 50 of them swore a secret pact. They would wait. They would plan, and they would avenge their master by taking Kira Yoshinaka's head. What followed was not a rash act of revenge, but a masterpiece of patience and strategy. Kira was, of course, suspicious. He knew the loyalty Asano's men held for their master. He fortified his mansion in Nido and sent spies to watch Jishi and the other prominent retainers. So the Ronin began a brilliant, painful performance of deception. They scattered across Japan, taking up menial trades as merchants and craftsmen. They appeared to have abandoned the way of the warrior. The leader, Jishi, put on the most convincing performance of all. He moved to Kyoto and seemingly gave himself over to a life of He was seen in brothels, he drank to excess in taverns, and he neglected his family. Imagine the discipline this required. Jishi, a man of honor, deliberately cultivating a reputation as a disgrace. The most famous part of his deception tells of a time he was found passed out drunk in the street. A samurai from the Satsuma domain, happening upon him, was so disgusted to see a samurai in such a state, a man who had failed to avenge his master, that he kicked Jishi in the face and spat on him. Jishi bore the humiliation without a word. His spies would report this back to Kira, and Kira would relax his guard, believing he had nothing to fear from these broken men. But all the while, the Ronin was secretly working. Weapons were smuggled into Edo piece by piece. Funds were gathered. The layout of Kira's mansion was studied, committed to memory from old blueprints. Secret messages were passed along trade routes. For nearly 2 years, they waited, their resolve hardening with every passing day. Finally, the time was right. On a cold, snowy night, in the 14th day of the 12th month of 1702, they gathered, 47 of them. They donned their old, makeshift armor and armed themselves. They were no longer pretending. They were samurai once more. They approached Kira's mansion in the quiet dark, the snow muffling their footsteps. They announced their presence with the beat of a drum, not as assassins in the night, but as samurai declaring their intent. They posted archers to prevent anyone from leaving to summon help. They sent a message to the neighboring houses, explaining who they were and that their purpose was not theft, but the execution of justice. The battle within the mansion was swift and efficient. Kira's own retainers fought bravely, but they were no match for the singular, desperate purpose of the Ronin. The Ronin searched the house, eventually finding Kira huddled in a storage shed, hidden amongst charcoal and firewood. Recognizing him by the scar on his face from Asano's attack, Jishi respectfully knelt. He identified himself and his purpose, and offered Kira the chance to die honorably, to commit seppuku with the very same short sword that had been used by their master. Asano, when the terrified Kira refused, Jishi held him down and, with that same blade, took his head. Their vow was fulfilled. They extinguished the fires, left the mansion, and walked in an orderly procession through the sleeping city of Edo, the snow crunching under their feet. One of their number was sent to carry the news to the families of their master. The remaining 46 marched towards the Sengakuji temple, where their lord was buried. When they arrived at the temple, they washed Kira's head in a well and laid it as a final offering upon their master's grave. They had restored his honor. And then they waited peacefully for the judgment of the shogun. The government was now in a difficult position. The Ronin had clearly broken the law. They had engaged in a private vendetta, an act forbidden in this peaceful era. Yet, their actions perfectly embodied the samurai virtue of loyalty, the very foundation of the feudal system that the shogunate sought to uphold. To execute them as common criminals would be to condemn the very ideal they promoted. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict was reached. The 46 Ronin were not to be executed as criminals. They were to be granted the honor of committing. It was a sentence, but it was also a recognition of their unwavering spirit. In the end, they died as they had lived for the past 2 years. As true samurai, they were buried at Sengakuji, beside the master they had served so faithfully in life and in death. Their story immediately became a legend, a subject for plays and poems. For men like our imagined samurai Tanaka, stamping documents in his dusty office, it was a powerful, intoxicating reminder of what it truly meant to be a warrior. It reinforced the idea that beneath the placid surface of their peaceful lives, the old codes of honor still held ultimate power. This story begged a question that all samurai had to ask themselves. What, exactly, was this code that could demand such a sacrifice? The unwritten code, the philosophy of Bushido. The tale of the 47 Ronin is like a perfectly struck temple bell. It resonates with such clarity and purpose. It is the story of Ukiyo-e of loyalty in its most absolute form. Their actions were so profound, so deeply in tune with the professed ideals of their class, that the government had no choice but to honor them, even as it condemned them. This forces us to ask a deeper question. What was this powerful force that guided them? What was this philosophy that could make death preferable to dishonor, and a 2-year quest for revenge a sacred duty? They were following the path of Bushido, the way of the warrior. It is a word that feels ancient, solid, carved from the very bedrock of Japanese history. Yet, much like the life of the peaceful samurai, the history of Bushido is more complex and layered than it first appears. Here lies a quiet mystery for us to explore. Was this an unbroken, 1,000-year-old code, passed down from the first warriors of the Genpei War? Or was it something else? Was it a philosophy that was, in many ways, polished, romanticized, and even codified during the long peace of the Edo period itself? Many historians would suggest the latter, that Bushido, as we often think of it, was less an ancient warrior's manual and more of a philosophical solution to a pressing problem, the problem of purpose. Imagine again, our bureaucrat, samurai, his class ruled the nation, but their primary function waging war was obsolete. To justify their continued status, their stipends, their right to wear 2 swords, the samurai had to be more than just retired warriors. They needed to be moral. They needed a philosophy that framed their existence, not around what they did with their swords, but what they were in their hearts. Bushido provided the answer. It shifted the focus from martial prowess to moral rectitude, and it was in the quiet, stable world of the Edo period that thinkers had the time and the inclination to write these ideas down, to discuss and debate them. 2 texts from this era stand out, each offering a different window into the samurai soul. They were not written for us, but for the samurai themselves, and listening to their echoes can bring us closer to their mindset. The first, and perhaps most famous, is the Hogakuya, which translates to In the Shadow of Leaves. It was not a book meant for a publication. It is a collection of thoughts and anecdotes from an elder samurai, dictated to a younger scribe around the year 1710. Just a few years after the 47 Ronin had fulfilled their vow, Tsunetomo was a man who felt his world was fading. His own lord had died, and the shogunate had forbidden him from committing the act of ritual suicide to follow one's master. So he became a monk, and from this forced retirement, he looked back on the past with a powerful, almost painful nostalgia. The most famous line from the Hogakuya is its most startling. The way of the samurai is found in death. This is not a call for mindless self-destruction. It is a profound psychological instruction. Tsunetomo argued that by meditating on death daily, by accepting it as an inevitability at any moment, a warrior could free himself from the fear of it. And once free from the fear of death, He could act with perfect clarity, sincerity, and decisiveness. There would be no hesitation when loyalty demanded action. He could serve his lord with his entire being, unburdened by concerns for his own safety. The Hogakuo preaches an absolute, unquestioning loyalty and a deep suspicion of overthinking and intellectualism, favoring instead the pure, swift action of a man already at peace with his own end. Contrast this with another great text of the era, the Book of Five Rings, written by the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi. If Tsunetomo was the nostalgic philosopher, Musashi was the ultimate pragmatist. He was an undefeated duelist, a man who had survived dozens of life-or-death encounters. His book is not a reflection on a lost past, but a practical guide to strategy. For Musashi, the way was about mastery. Mastery of the sword, yes, but also the mastery of any art. He wrote of rhythm, of timing, of understanding the opponent's mind, of seeing the unseen. His philosophy was less about dying well and more about winning, about succeeding through perception, discipline, and a deep understanding of the fundamental principles of conflict. It was a bushido for the survivor, the strategist, the master of his craft. Over time, these complex and often contradictory ideas were smoothed out and organized into a set of virtues. This list of 7 virtues is what most people today think of as Buddhism, though it was largely popularized long after the samurai were gone, in an attempt to explain the Japanese spirit to the Western world. Still, these virtues give us a framework for the ideal, for the perfect warrior that our samurai Tanaka would have aspired to be. First was Gi, or righteousness, the ability to know the right path, to have a moral compass that guides every action. Then Wik, courage, but not simple recklessness. It was what was called heroic courage, tempered by intelligence and serenity, to face hardship, to face death, with a calm spirit. Jin, benevolence. The warrior, being powerful, had a duty of compassion, to use his strength, not just for his lord, but to protect the weak and help those in need. Rei, respect. This was the source of the endless etiquette of daily life. Not just good manners, but a profound expression of one's place in the universe. A way to show sincere respect for others and for the social harmony of the world. Makoto, honesty and sincerity. The idea that for a samurai, to speak and to do were the same thing. His word was an action in itself, and a promise was an unbreakable bond. Meiho, honor. This was perhaps the most potent of all. A vivid and intense awareness of one's personal dignity and reputation. It was the loss of this honor that drove Asano to draw his sword, and the need to restore it that drove his ronin. And finally, at the very center of the code, holding all others together, was Chigi loyalty. An absolute, unwavering devotion to one's lord, one's family, and one's shogun. It was the bedrock upon which the entire feudal structure was built. Righteousness, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty. It is a beautiful and noble code. But we must remember the reality. While the samurai revered these ideals, the pressures of daily life often created a deep chasm between philosophy and practice. The samurai might meditate on the virtue of righteousness in the morning, and then spend the afternoon humbling himself before a merchant to secure a loan to feed his family. He might read of Musashi's strategic brilliance, while his own greatest challenge was finding an error in a tax ledger. He might revere the absolute loyalty of the 47 Ronin, while quietly resenting the fact that his own hereditary lord offered him no chance for advancement. The philosophy of Bushido, then, served a dual purpose in the Edo period. It was a genuine moral guide, a high bar for personal conduct, but it was also a kind of psychological armor. It was a story the samurai told themselves about themselves, a way to maintain their sense of identity and honor in a world that no longer truly needed their swords. It was a noble dream of purpose, in an age of profound, and often frustrating. And while the samurai class looked inward, cultivating this stoic, severe, and honor-bound ideal, a new world was blossoming right outside their gate. A world created by the merchants they disdained. A world not of duty, but of pleasure. Not of permanence, but of glorious, fleeting moments. A world that was, in every way, Bushido's opposite. The floating world. The life of the merchant class. Let us leave the quiet, austere home of our samurai. Let us walk away from the silent pressure of his unwritten code, and the polished gleam of his unused swords. Let us follow the scent of grilled eel and sweet rice wine, and the sound of laughter carried on the evening air. We are heading towards a different part of the city. Here, the lanterns glow, not with a sense of duty, but with a promise of delight. We are entering the floating world. This was the vibrant, pleasure-seeking universe of the chunin, the townspeople, and especially the merchants. In the strict social hierarchy of the Tokugawa shogunate, merchants were officially on the bottom rung. They produced nothing, it was argued. They did not farm rice like the peasants, or build goods like the artisans, or provide rule like the samurai. They simply profited from the work of others. But in the long peace of the Edo period, a cash economy had blossomed, and it was the merchants who held the purse strings. While many samurai struggled with their fixed rice stipends, successful merchants accumulated vast fortunes, and because they were barred from owning land or seeking political office, they spent their wealth on a culture of sophistication, transient pleasure. The term Ukiyo originally had Buddhist connotations, meaning the sorrowful world of earthly, but the merchants of Edo cheekily reimagined it. Their world was indeed fleeting and transient, but it was something to be celebrated, not lamented. It was a world of fashion, entertainment, and beauty, to be enjoyed here and now. If life was but a dream, why not make it a beautiful one? Imagine yourself walking through the licensed pleasure district of Edo. The streets are clean and orderly, but alive with energy. The air is thick with incense, perfume, and the savory smells from food stalls. Here, the rigid social distinctions of the outside world become blurred. It was in the floating world that a wealthy merchant, for a night, could feel superior to the samurai. He was forced to bow to during the day. Money, not birthright, was the key that unlocked the doors here. And behind those doors was a world of refined entertainment. You might find yourself in a bustling kabuki theater, unlike the stately, restrained no theater favored by the samurai elite. Kabuki was bombastic, colorful, and emotional. The stories were about love, suicides, heroic bandits, and historical epics retold with dramatic flair. The actors, who often came from humble backgrounds, became colossal celebrities. Fans would follow their every move, and their faces would be known throughout the land. Or perhaps you would attend a sumo tournament. The wrestlers, giants of men, were also heroes of the floating world. Their matches were spectacles of power and ritual, drawing huge crowds and inspiring passionate devotion. The most refined and iconic figures of the floating world were the geisha. These were not simply courtesans, but highly trained artists. A geisha was a master of conversation, music, and dance. She could play the three-stringed semusin, sing the latest popular songs, and engage her clients in witty, intelligent banter. To spend an evening in a tea house with a high-ranking geisha was a symbol of immense wealth and sophistication. Even the samurai, who publicly disdained this world of indulgence, were often drawn to it. Here, a samurai like Tanaka, perhaps disguised in a straw hat to hide his face, could momentarily escape the crushing pressures of his station. He could spend some of his borrowed money on a warm cup of sake and forget, for a few hours, the ledgers and the fraying edges of his kimono. The floating world was a secret release valve for the rigidly structured society. But how do we know so much about this fleeting world? How do we see its fashions, its celebrities, its moods? We know it through its art. The merchants of the Ukiyo patronized a new form of art that was as accessible and popular as the culture it depicted. The Ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world. These were woodblock prints. Using a revolutionary technique, artists could collaborate with carvers and printers to mass-produce beautiful, full-color images. For the price of a bowl of noodles, an ordinary person could own a piece of art. These prints were the posters, the fashion magazines, and the celebrity photos of their day. Think of artists like Hokusai and Hiroshi. They captured this world with breathtaking genius. Hiroshige's prints would show you the 53 stations of the Tokaido Road, the great highway connecting Edo and Kyoto, allowing you to travel the country in your mind. Hokusai, in his famous series 36 Views of Mount Fuji, showed the sacred mountain from every conceivable angle looming behind a massive wave, seen through the staves of a barrel being made, or as a tiny peak on the horizon of a bustling city street. But these artists also showed us the people. They gave us portraits of famous kabuki actors in their most dramatic roles. They showed us elegant courtesans in the latest, most elaborate kimono designs. They depicted lively scenes in tea houses, sumo matches, and festivals. The art of Ukiyo-e was not about gods or nobles in the abstract. It was about the vibrant, messy, beautiful, and transient life of the city. This presents us with the final, beautiful contrast of our journey tonight. On the one hand, you have the samurai clinging to an ideal of permanence. His honor, his loyalty, his name, these were things meant to last for eternity. His philosophy, Bushido, was about facing death, to give life a timeless meaning. On the other hand, you have the merchant, embracing the opposite. He celebrated the moment, a flower that blooms in the morning and wilts by evening, the foam on a cup of tea, the particular grace of a dancer's movement, a beautiful kimono that would be out of fashion next year. He found meaning not in eternity, but in the impermanence of the floating world. Two philosophies, two ways of life, existing side by side in the same city, often overlapping in the most unexpected ways. The samurai, with his ancient name and his empty pockets, and the merchant, with his low status and his heavy purse, were two halves of the soul of Edo, Japan. And so our journey through the unseen life of the samurai comes to a close. We have walked the quiet corridors of his bureaucratic life, feeling the weight of his station and the burden of his purpose. We have recounted the legendary tale of the 47 Ronin, an echo of perfect loyalty that gave meaning to an entire class. We have explored the deep, philosophical currents of Bushido, the unwritten code that was both a guide and a consolation. And we have glimpsed the vibrant, floating world that offered a fleeting escape from that rigid reality. The world of the samurai, with its stark ideals and quiet struggles, seems very far from our own. Their concerns are not our concerns. Their strict codes are not our codes. And yet, the questions they faced are timeless. How do we find purpose when the world changes around us? What have we valued more, honor or comfort, permanence or pleasure? To what and to whom are we truly loyal? These are not questions to be answered now. Now is the time for rest. The samurai's day is over. The merchant's lantern has been extinguished. The floating world has drifted off into dream. All of the struggles, the ambitions, the quiet desperations, and the fleeting joys of Edo, Japan have fallen silent. They have been absorbed back into the great, quiet stream of history. And you can let them go. Feel the comfort of your own bed, the safety of your own room. The peace you enjoy tonight is not stifling or enforced. It is a true and gentle peace. There are no ledgers to balance, no honor to defend, no pressure to be anything other than what you are, right here, right now. Allow the last echoes of this story to dissolve. Allow your own thoughts to become as soft and indistinct as a Ukiyo-e print of distant hills in the mist. There is nothing left to do but to float, and to drift, and to sleep.